Good morning and happy Hanukkah. Today is Monday, the 25th day of Kislev, and that is the first day of Hanukkah. We lit last night the first candle. And of course, this is very much connected with what we are doing here, lighting the spiritual candle, learning the Tanya. And that is the inner part of the Torah, the secret part of the Torah, which is connected with oil as we celebrate the miracle of Hanukkah. It is connected with the miracle of oil. Oil represents, according to Kabbalah, the Chachma, the wisdom. Oil penetrates everywhere, and oil is kept separated from anything else. So that means it's aloof, it's holy, and at the same time it penetrates through. So we are holding in the middle of chapter 1 in Tanya. Alter Rebbe began this chapter, the book of Tanya, with explaining first the idea of what is the different levels of people. There is the tzaddik, the rasha, the wicked one, the righteous one, the wicked one. There's different categories of righteous, different categories of wicked. And the Beinoni, the intermediate. And we came to understand that when we're saying a tzaddik is not defined by the action that he does. You can do everything right and still not be a tzaddik, and still be a Beinoni. And he proved it in different ways. You can still be an intermediate, and then later on in Tanya will explain how the intermediate is not such a simple level. However, the question is, what is a tzaddik then? So the Alter Rebbe begins in today's second half of the chapter 1. He will explain, first of all, that we're saying that we find different places in the Torah that describes a tzaddik and a rasha based on the actions of a person. Meaning, when you say someone is doing right, is coming out in the court, the heavenly court, is coming out a tzaddik, is a person who has more good than bad. So the Alter Rebbe says that this is the description of this person as a tzaddik is not a real description of a tzaddik, but he calls it Shem Amushal, a borrowed term. So let's look inside. See, Alter Rebbe explains this, and later on the Alter Rebbe goes into some very important topics in Judaism as we'll go along in this class. So here says the Alter Rebbe, V'hodeh amrinen be'alme, the mechza al mechza mikra beineni v'roiv schuyas mikra tzaddik. As for the well-known saying that one whose deeds and misdeeds are equally balanced is called a Beinoni, while a Beinoni, like the intermediate person, and he who has a majority of virtues outweighing his sins is called a tzaddik. Says the Alter Rebbe, Ushem Amushal. This is only a borrowed name. That person who has a majority of virtues is not a real tzaddik. We just call him a tzaddik in reference to his situation based on the court and the judgment. In judgment, it becomes a tzaddik, means he becomes clean, so to speak. And this is le'inyan sacha v'oinish. This is used in regards to reward and punishment. Because one is judged according to his majority of his deeds, and is termed righteous in reference to his verdict, since he is acquitted at his trial. So it's not the real term of tzaddik. Obviously, a person has half sins and half virtues, cannot be called a real tzaddik, even if it's more virtues than sins. It is only in this legal sense that the term tzaddik is applied to one who performs more good deeds than evil. And by the way, it doesn't mean that a person who has some sins, a more good than evil, more virtues than sins, the sins are completely ignored, because everything a person needs to be purified and cleansed from any sin, even if it's a small amount. However, here in the way he's judged, a person who has a majority of virtues is judged in a different way. That's the way the Rebbe explains it. Is in a different category. However, but this does not define the person as a real tzaddik. Avol, that's what Alter Rebbe continues. Velamitas shema toya ve'amayla shel maylas umadrigas chalukas tzaddikim u'beinenim. If, however, we seek to truly define the distinct qualities and ranks of tzaddikim and beinenim, the righteous and the intermediate, Amru Razal, our sages of blessed memory, have said, tzaddikim yetzer tov shoftam. The righteous are judged by the good nature. What does it mean they're judged by the good nature? That they're motivated and ruled only by the good nature, by the yetzer tov. They don't have any control whatsoever from the Yetzer Hara. Doesn't have any control on them. The evil side does not have any control. Shenema, and we find it says, it is written, King David says, V'libi cholol bekirbi, and my heart is a void within me. And our sages interpret this to mean, She'ein lo Yetzer Hara ki haroga b'tainis, meaning that he, King David, the author of this verse in the Psalms, he was devoid of an evil nature, having slain it through fasting. That's what King David did. Through fasting, he was able to eliminate completely the Yetzer Hara and reach the level of a tzaddik. There's different ways to do it, but as we learn later in Tanya, that is not easily achievable. And very rarely do people get to the level of a tzaddik. But whoever has not attained this degree of ridding himself of the evil nature, even though his virtues outnumber his sins, he is not at all at the level of the rank and rank of a tzaddik. Not at all. When it's saying not at all, it means not even a Beinani, not even an intermediate. Why? Because a Beinani also, as we'll learn later in Tanya, does not have any sins, does not do any sins. And therefore, Amru Razal, our sages said in Medrash, Ro'a Kadosh Baruch Hu b'tzadikim she'muotim, Omad u'shesalam b'chol dei v'dei v'chulu. That Almighty One saw that the righteous were few, so he arose and planted them in every generation. So, Kamoshe Kasuv, and as it is written, V'tzadik yesod ha'olam. The tzaddik is the foundation of the world. In order to have a world, you must have tzaddikim. So that is why Hashem planted them in every generation. So obviously, we're not talking about people who are acting good, acting like righteous, because that, Baruch Hashem, we have plenty. Wherever you go, you'll find many people who are virtuous, kind, doing only good things, davening, studying Torah, and so on. So for that, Hashem did not need to plant them. The reason why Hashem needed to plant the tzaddikim, because that's the real tzaddik is of a whole different category that is not very common. And now the Alter Rebbe goes to explain all of this, what it means, what is the makeup of the human being, what is the makeup of our soul, of our emotions, our characters. And knowing this, we'll have the ability to understand how to serve Hashem and to be able to guide us how to serve God in the proper way. So the Rebbe begins, and however, the explanation of the matter, so that we better understand the level of tzaddik and beinoni, as well as the various radiations within their ranks. Al pima shekosav Rav Chaim Vital zechron levrocha b'shar hakedusha ubeitz Chaim sharnun perik beis. Based, it is founded in the light of what Rabbi Chaim Vital. Rabbi Chaim Vital, he was a student of the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria. He wrote in the Shara Kedusha and in Eitz Chaim, Portal 50, chapter 2, and he writes as follows: the Lechol Ish Yisrael, Echad Tzadik ve'Echad Rasha, Yesh Shtei Neshamas. That every Jew, whether righteous or wicked, he possesses two souls. Two souls. As it is written, unashamas and souls and neshamas. Sorry about that. Unashamas ani asisi and neshamas which I have made. So we see it's talking about neshamas in a plural sense, even though that verse in Isaiah is talking about in the context of creating a single spirit. And then it says, and I made souls. So what does it mean, souls? We have two souls. Now, the Rebbe is going to say that when we are saying, we know that we have good inclinations and bad inclinations, but is giving us an understanding of what these inclinations are, that they're not just that we have one personality, and sometimes we have an inclination on the outside that pulls at one direction and another direction. No. It is that we have two different souls, two different personalities, two different lives, in a sense. And therefore, it's not just that we as a person, we are drawn to one way or another, but there are two souls that fight over us, which one should win. And he says, Shem Shtei Nefashos, these neshamas are two nefashos. Nefashos is another word for souls. The reason why he says that is because we know the word neshama also refers to a very, very high level of the soul, because the soul has 5 different levels: nephesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, yechida. And neshama is a high level of the soul. So because it mentions neshama is ani asisi and I made neshamas, Alter Rebbe is pointing out here that we're not referring to the level of the soul, which is called neshama, which is above the physical level, but he's talking about the regular souls. Because obviously, when we're talking about the two souls, we cannot say that the animal soul is also neshama. It's not. The animal soul is a soul from a lower level. So that's what he says. Shem Shtei Nefashos. These two souls are literally souls that vitalize. Nefesh achas mitzad haklip. And he begins to explain first the soul that is the animalistic soul. Called nephesh achas mitzad haklipa v'sitra acha. One soul originates in the klipa and sitra acha. What is kalipa? Kalipa literally means the shell. Sitra acha means the other side. And this refers to the not good side of the world. The world is godliness covered in a shell. And there's different types of shells. There's a shell that is a thin shell, a shell that allows to see the inside. And there's a shell that is a very thick shell. And we in life, we need to understand and focus and realize that our physical life is only the shell, and we have to find what's inside, just like a fruit, that the shell covers the good fruit that is inside. So one soul comes from the klipa, from the shell. This is the nephesh, a soul that is clothed in the blood of the human being, giving life to the body. And it is written, it is written that the nephesh of the flesh, the nephesh that sustains the physical and corporal life, is in the blood. And Alter Rebbe says that this soul creates and brings about all kinds of characters. There is the bad characters, and even the good characters come from it. And just like in the world, everything in the world comes from four elements, which is the fire, water, and wind, air, and earth. So the same thing also, the spiritual characters that we have also come from these type of elements, spiritual elements of the fire, water, the air, and the earth. That's what Alter Rebbe continues and says, from this nephesh stems all evil characteristics, deriving from the four evil elements within it, the hainu, and he goes to details to explaining what they come, what these elements bring, which example of which characteristics come from which element. So he says, the hainu kas v'gaiva mi'yisoda eish nigbal l'mayla. Anger, namely says anger and pride, emanates from the element of fire, which rises upward. You get angry because you're arrogant. Just like fire, this is the nature of the fire, rises above. You feel yourself special. The appetite for pleasures emanates from the element of water, because water promotes the growth of all kinds of pleasurable things. So the water, the element of water, is the character of seeking pleasure. Then he says, then is another characteristics of the hoilelus, v'leitzanus, v'isporus, dvorim betelim, v'seder ruach. Hoilelus is like frivolity. It's like, being holel, being silly, doing things. V'leitzanus, mockery. Isparus, boasting, dvorim betelim, and idle talk. Misayder ruach, that comes from the element of air. Just like air does not have any substance. The same thing, those things, which, by the way, he mentions over here, Sparrows, boasting, is from the element of air. Earlier we mentioned that arrogance comes from the element of fire. And the difference between the two is arrogance is when you're arrogant because of something that you have. You're smart, makes you arrogant. You're rich, whatever, makes you arrogant. And so that comes from the element of fire. Sparrows, boasting, means when you're boasting, this is with no substance, nothing to be proud of. Just to have the nature, the characteristic of boasting. So all of those things come from this element. And sloth and melancholy emanates from the element of earth. Laziness, melancholy. So it's like heavy, just like the earth is heavy. So this is from the soul, the animalistic soul, that comes from the klipa. And this is the roots and source of these characteristics from the different elements. Now says the Alter Rebbe, v'gam midas toivos shebedeva kol Yisrael beteldoisam, k'moi rachmanus v'minas chasadim bois mimena. It says even the good traits that is inherent in a Jew, is from this soul stems also the good traits inherent in every Jew's character, such as compassion and benevolence. Those are characteristics of a Jew. It's compassionate, benevolent. It is innate in our nature. And it says, why? Because in the case of the Jew, the soul of klipa is derived from the klipa called noga. What is the klipa called noga? Which is also contains good. And the good within the nephesh gives rise to these positive natural traits. And this klipa is from the esoteric tree of knowledge, which is comprised of good and evil. This is where the klipa comes from. What is the Alter Rebbe saying here? He's talking about the difference between the neshama, the nephesh, and the animalistic soul of a Jew and a non-Jew. So what he's saying here, obviously we know there is the concept of Chasidei Yisraelim, the righteous Gentiles. The Gemara tells us about that they have chelek l'olam haba, they have a right place in the world to come. And certainly, Alter Rebbe here says, as he's going to explain, that there is a difference between the good that a Jew does and good that a non-Jew does. In a sense, he's not talking about individual people. He's talking about the nature of the goyishkeit, in a sense, what we can say. That in this world, we have the nations of the world. Ultimately, what is the goal of the nations of the world? It says, when Mashiach comes, it's going to be a time that all of them will be serving Hashem, Shechem Echad, L'Ovdei Kulam Shechem Echad. And in fact, it says that the Rebbe brings down, it says from the Rambam, that even a goy that seeks to become holy, a goy that studies Torah, the Torah that he's allowed to study, he becomes holy Kodesh Kadashim, it says, even about a goy. So even a goy certainly is able to bring out the good. And this is indeed something we see more and more as the generation progresses. We get closer to Mashiach, that goyim become aware of the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, the Seven Noachide laws. But here the Alter Rebbe brings out and says that this is the difference. But this is the Chasidei Yisraelim, the righteous Gentiles, that they can reach that level. When we're talking about here, that the difference that a Jew has in his nature, something that comes from the good, and when he does good, he does it wholeheartedly. Without any ulterior motive, he will still do it. Versus the guy that comes from the ultimate not good side, which is something that we are working on changing, and Baruch Hashem, we're succeeding. That character of goy comes from a place which is completely doing for selfish things. Even when it does good, it will do it for selfish reasons. And that's what Alter Rebbe says here. So let's look inside. The souls of the nations of the world, however, emanates from the other unclean klippos which contain no good whatsoever. As it is written in Eitz Chaim, Portal 49, Chapter 3, that all the good that the nations do is done out of selfish motives. since the nephesh emanates from the klipa, which contains no good. It follows that any good done by them is for selfish motives. And as it is written in the Gemara, in the Talmud, al pasuk v'chesed le'umim chatas. A comment on the verse, the kindness of the nations is sin. What does that mean? That all the charities and kindness done by the nations of the world is only for the self-glorification. So the truth of the matter is, ask anybody, when you do something good, why do you do it? You will always find some ulterior motive you're doing for selfish reason in one way or another. You're giving charity. Why are you giving charity? Because different reasons. You can do it because you want to save on taxes. You can do it because you want to be known, printed as like people should know that you're a kind person. That's selfish reasons. Even if you do it for good reasons. Let's say you see a person starving, or you hear in the newspaper there's a famine in a country, people are sick, and you want to help them, you feel bad for them. So obviously that's a virtuous thing to do, but in the same time, there is also a little selfishness there also. Why? Because it makes you feel good. When you see somebody suffering, you feel bad. And when you're doing to help a person, you're doing obviously a good thing, but there's a little bit involved there also, a little selfishness here, because you want to feel good. You don't want to see people starving. It's hard to understand. I mean, you can see the difference when you see someone, you feel bad about a person's helping a situation, and you want to give him something, and somebody else gave him. So you say, "Oh, I wanted to give him. I wanted to feel good that I gave him." So there is a little selfishness involved. To be really good, purely good, it comes from a much deeper place. And that's what Alter Rebbe says, that yes, indeed, it says there are exceptions by Goyim. This is the difference between a Yid and a Goy, a Jew and a non-Jew. And there's exceptions, there's also Goyim that are called Chasidei Yom HaSolam, which also have that good virtue. And indeed, I mean, we don't know who is and who is not, but we know we're getting closer to Mashiach that more and more Goyim are joining that category. So this is the end of today's shir, the end of chapter 1. And thank you for joining. Mitzvah Hashem will continue tomorrow. Have a wonderful, wonderful day and a happy Hanukkah.